In this video, I'll go over everything you need to know regarding the driving on the tracks in the Banana Cup, the shroomless lines, the shortcuts and driving strats, and the coin routes. Additionally, as I never mentioned this before, I'll only be using Wiggler and Scooty for 2 tracks each, and they'll only appear for the other tracks if there are differences in the shroomless lines. So in most cases, if you only see the Wiggler lines, chances are that Scooty has the same general lines on said track. But without further ado, let's start giving her, bud. Just before getting started, if you enjoy this video, consider subscribing. It's free. It helps me out a lot, and you can always change your minds. Starting things off, we got Dry Desert. This is the most popular bagging track in the game, so more likely than not, the optimal driving won't be that relevant to you, but it's still good to know. You want to begin a right drift as you approach the first turn. It's a longer one, and you want to charge up a super mini turbo. Release that super mini turbo into a slide or two into a left drift. Generally speaking, it doesn't matter too much how early or late you release your super mini turbo, as long as it's not too early or too late. Anyway, chain 3 mini turbos around the short turn section, very similar to Moo Moo Meadows. After the third one, begin a right drift while going inside the pokey, and begin to soft drift as you approach the later end of the turn. Release an ultra mini turbo shortly after you get it, and position yourself toward the right side of the sandpit section, but not too far right. I suggest next to these 2 lines. Anyway, begin a left drift here and hold wide. There isn't a specific input to go as tight as possible without falling into the hole, so you're fine to hold wide while still being in a solid line. Shortly after charging up a mini turbo, release it into a right slide, into a left slide, into a right drift as you're back on the main sand. You want to soft drift while you're in the air, and as you land, hold wide. You want to release a mini turbo as soon as you get it, into a left slide, into a right drift. On laps 2 and 3, there's a pillar for you to perform a regular mini turbo trick off of, then begin a right drift as soon as you land. You want to stay as tight as possible while generally holding wide, then release a super mini turbo either just before or just after entering the water. You want to position yourself toward the right incline where you'll perform 2 tricks. As you land back in the water, hold left for a bit to reposition yourself, then begin a right drift. You'll then perform a regular mini turbo trick off the ramp as you exit the water, then begin a right drift as soon as you land. Charge up a super mini turbo around the second last turn, and release it as soon as you get it into a left hop, into a left drift. As you're on the final straight and you've charged up a mini turbo, you can chain a bunch of mini turbos before approaching the first turn, and yeah, it's a whole lot of giving her, bud. Altogether, you want to begin a right drift on the first turn and charge up a super mini turbo. Release it into multiple mini turbos on the short turn section, then hold a longer drift on the next big turn. Charge up an ultra mini turbo and release it as soon as you're on the following straight. Begin a left drift before the sandpit section and hold wide. Release a mini turbo and begin a right drift before exiting the sandpit. Release that mini turbo as soon as you get it, then charge up a super mini turbo as you approach the underwater section. Release it, then perform 2 tricks off the right incline. Perform a mini turbo trick off the exiting underwater ramp, then charge up a super mini turbo around the second last turn. From here, it's just a bunch of continuous mini turbos, and yeah, that's how you drive Dry Desert. While this section is brief, most of the heavy-hitting shortcuts and strats will be discussed next week. There are 2 big shortcuts here. First and foremost, the double shroom cut. It saves a great amount of time, and even though you skip an item set, in most situations, it's definitely worth going for. And of course, the ending cut. It can easily be done with 1 mushroom, and you'll save a massive amount of time taking it. Additionally, there are also a few other pillars you can trick off of to save a tiny bit of time, but they don't really matter too much in the long run. As long as you have a general idea of the lines I went over earlier, you'll be good to go and can fully focus on your item management, which, considering this is a bagging track, you'll have to do that a lot. Even though I only collected 1 coin while driving tight, you have a few very appealing options for coin collecting. Considering this is the heaviest bagging track in the game, whether you're running or bagging, you should easily be able to collect up to 10 coins in no time. You have the 3 wide coins on the first turn, the few coins in the middle of the pokies, the 4 wide coins on both the very left and right of the sandpit, and the 3 wide coins on the turn before the last set. While it may not seem like you have a ton of options, these options are very reliable, especially the 3 and 4 coin bunches. But with that, Dry Desert has been covered, so let's start giving her on Donut Plains 3. Donut Plains 3 is a pretty short track, but it's still a fun track to drive in my opinion. You want to begin a right drift well before the first turn, so around the time your starting boost runs out. As you begin to go around the turn, you want to fully soft drift, then release a super mini turbo as soon as you get it, immediately into a left hop. Now, before getting into the no item shortcut or NISC, I need to make something very clear. The method I'm about to show you is not the fastest method, but rather the safest, at least in my opinion. It's faster to approach the shortcut while entering the underwater section right away, but I have a much higher success success rate by not using the underwater method. Anyway, what I do is perform a neutral hop into a right drift over the bridge gap. Then you want to soft drift a tiny bit, and as you approach this bump, hold wide. You want to continue holding wide while in the air, and as you go off the second bump, that's when you want to soft drift in the air to get a super mini turbo. Release it as soon as you land, and once you're repositioned, do a hop or two, then drive into the water. You want to begin a left drift shortly after, and position yourself to the very left of the uphill while driving inside of it, so you don't get any unwanted air. You want to drift tight for as long as you're underwater. Once you're past the uphill main road, then hold wide once you exit the water and release your super mini turbo in the air. As you land, you want to perform a right hop into a left drift. Charge up a mini turbo as you approach the next two coins and release it shortly after getting it into a right drift. For the most part, soft drift around the following turn and release an ultra mini turbo as soon as you get it. If you can, perform two tricks off the mole trails. As you land from the second trick, begin a left drift and charge up a mini turbo, release it into a right drift, and charge up a super mini turbo around the final turn. As you're on the right of the straight, release your super mini turbo into two left hops into a right drift to charge up one last mini turbo, then release that into a left hop, and would you look at that? You're a natural! Adding it all up, begin a right drift before the first turn and charge up a super mini turbo. Go off the bumps with another right drift and release another super mini turbo next to the wall of the Nisk. Begin a left drift shortly after going underwater and go inside of the uphill main road. Release a super mini turbo in the air into a quick mini turbo into a right drift shortly after. Charge up an ultra mini turbo, release it on the following turn, and trick off the mole trails if you can. Perform a mini turbo on the second last turn and a super mini turbo on the last turn with one last mini turbo on the final straight, and from there, you're just full Senator Bud. Again, not a whole lot to talk about here regarding the shortcuts and driving strats. Obviously, you can use a shroom to take the beginning shortcut, and you'll be in the same position driving-wise as you would be if you took it shroomless, so nothing too worrisome here. You could also shroom through the ending cut easily, but be careful if you're in the pack and others are shrooming as well. You could be in for a bad surprise. Other than that, there are a few Nisks on this track, but they aren't all that special. Again, as long as you can master the lines I showcased earlier, you'll be good to go without a doubt. Now, because of the beginning Nisk, you do miss out on some coins, but that doesn't really matter as you can collect up to 8 coins while driving tight. If you need coins immediately though, you have up to 4 coins around the Nisk, and if the tight coins around the final turn are taken, you can take the second tightest coins as well and turn out decently. Generally, you shouldn't have to worry too much about coins here, especially because this is a backing track for some. Collecting coins should be another day in the office. Anyway, that's the way she goes on Donut Plains 3. Let's keep her going on Royal Raceway. Royal Raceway is a pretty basic track driving wise, but there are still a couple neat things you can do here. A bit before the first turn, you want to position yourself to the left of the straight, then perform a left drift. As soon as you charge up a mini turbo, which should be on the following straight, release it immediately into another left drift. Hold wide, and as you charge up a mini turbo, hold tight to charge a super mini turbo, which you'll release into a right drift. For the most part, soft drift around the following turn and charge up an ultra mini turbo. Release it as soon as you get it, immediately into another right drift. Soft drift for as long as you can stay on the main road, then hold wide, and you should be able to release a super mini turbo into a left hop into another right drift. This can be pretty precise on Wiggler, especially with 10 coins, but it's still doable. Anyway, charge up a mini turbo around the following turn and release it as soon as you get it, immediately into a left drift. Soft drift for a tiny bit, then hold wide as you approach the strip before the ramp cut. As you're about to leave the strip, perform a right hop into a right slide as you land into a trick off the ramp. Begin a right drift as soon as you land and charge up a super mini turbo on the following turn. Release your super mini turbo as you approach the first shadow into 2 left hops into a right drift. Quickly charge up a mini turbo, release it, and reposition yourself. Shortly after going over the first boost panel, perform a left hop into a right drift and soft drift until you touch the second coin, then hold wide. Perform a low glider off the glider ramp. You can do some vector shenanigans by holding forward then back, all while holding left if you'd like. Anyway, land on the 2 coins and begin a left drift as soon as you land. Charge up a super mini turbo and release it as soon as you're on the following straight. Begin a left drift as you approach the first of the last few coins. At this point, chain a few mini turbos before the final turn, and on the final turn, charge up a super mini turbo. As you're on the final straight, release your super mini turbo into a right hop, into a right slide, into a left drift, and quickly charge up another mini turbo. And that's it. Sounds pretty easy, eh bud? To summarize, the first few turns are pretty straightforward. A mini turbo, a super mini turbo, and an ultra mini turbo. The following super mini turbo is a little tight, but you should be able to get it. Then perform a mini turbo shortly after, and then release another mini turbo off the strip and trick off the ramp. Charge up a super mini turbo on the following turn and release that into a quick mini turbo on the straight. Then perform a low glider and do some vector shenanigans if you're comfortable doing so. Begin a left drift as soon as you land and charge up a super mini turbo. Release it on the straight, change some mini turbos into a super mini turbo on the final turn, and one last mini turbo on the final straight. Yeehaw, bud! You have quite a few off-road shortcuts, but the only one that really stands out is the shroom spot. While you do skip an item set, it does save a ton of time and is definitely worth going for in most cases if you have a speed item to take the shortcut with. Other than that, again, a few small off-road cuts here and there, but nothing to brag about, honestly. This is one of the best tracks in the game for coin collecting. You can easily collect more than 10 coins while driving tight, and you have a ton of options outside of the tight lines. You have the 3 wide coins on the second turn, the 2 sets of 2 wide coins before the ramp, the 3 wide coins after the ramp, and the 3 wide coins on the final turn. There are even some one-off coins I didn't talk about, so yeah, Royal Raceway is definitely a contender for the best coin collecting track in the game. But that's about all you need to know regarding the driving on Royal Raceway. Let's get the job done on DK Jungle. DK Jungle is one of the more technical tracks in the game, but honestly, most of this track isn't too difficult to drive. Shortly after the race begins, you want to begin a right drift around the first turn. These first couple turns before the flower bounce aren't too special, just 2 mini turbos into a right drift before the route. Regardless of which coin you go for, release your mini turbo immediately into a left drift as you touch the coin. Now, you can keep your drift if you want to play it safe, but if you want to perform the fast bounce, perform a neutral hop once you land into a left drift before the boost ramp. You'll have to soft drift quite a lot while in the air, especially on Wiggler. Anyway, release your mini turbo and trick off the ramp right away to get the super bounce. Depending on where you land, you may need to perform a right slide into a left drift as you land, or you might just need to begin a left drift as soon as you land. Either way, charge up a super mini turbo and release it as you're on the following straight. Begin a right drift as you touch the second coin, and as soon as you're on the following turn, release your mini turbo immediately into a left drift. Soft drift until you're on the glider path, then release your super mini turbo as you're on the pillar section of the glider path, with an additional hop if need be. Trick off the glider ramp and dive down slowly before the next boost ramp. You want to begin a right drift as soon as you land and soft drift while you're in the air. Begin to hold wide as soon as you land, and while in the air, shortly after the second boost ramp, release your mini turbo while holding left. You'll get a solid launch forward doing so. Perform a left slide if need be as you land before the final boost ramp, then trick off the ramp. Begin a right drift as soon as you land, and as you're driving upwards, release your mini turbo immediately into a left drift. Soft drift where you can and release an ultra mini turbo as soon as you get it into a right hop. Trick off the ramp and hop before performing a right slide into a left drift. To get the optimal glider, you kind of want to get a half low glider, half regular mini turbo glider, but it generally doesn't matter too much. You can do some light vector shenanigans too if you'd like. But anyway, land after the underwater and begin a left drift as soon as you land. Charge up a super mini turbo and release it on the tight path into a few hops or slides if you'd like, and trick off the ramp. And you're giving her till the cows come home. Putting it all together, perform 2 mini turbos around the short turns, then release another mini turbo before the super bounce. Remember the fast method I went over earlier, and begin a left drift as you land. Release a super mini turbo on the bridge into a mini turbo before the glider path, then a super mini turbo on the glider. Remember the fast method for these ramps as well, specifically with the mini turbo in the air, and begin a right drift as you land on the anti-gravity section. Release a mini turbo into a left drift and charge up an ultra mini turbo on this turn. Release it and trick off the ramp and get a mini turbo glider in a half low glider fashion. If you want, you can do some vector shenanigans, then begin a left drift as soon as you land. Release a super mini turbo on the tight path and trick off the ramp, and would you look at that? It's just another day in the office. Well, there's really only one shortcut worth going over here, and it's the shroom spot in the off-road next to the glider ramp. You'll save a solid amount of time doing this, and while it isn't the fast shroom spot, it's definitely the safe option, especially considering it's right after the second set rather than right before. It's pretty solid. While you can only collect up to 6 coins when taking the tightest lines, I think this is a decent track for coin collecting. It'll take you more than 1 lap to collect 10 coins that are laid out on the track, but the other options aren't terrible. You have the right coins before the bounce, the right coins on the bridge, the 4 wide coins on the main road, the wide coins on the boost ramp section, the wide 2 or both tight coins on the anti-gravity section, and the 3 wide coins on the final turn. So yeah, not a whole lot of unique options, as most of them are next to the coins in the shroomless lines, but you still have options in that regard. Anyway, that's everything you need to know regarding the driving on DK Jungle, and of course, the rest of the Banana Cup as well. I hope you got something out of this video. If you did, I'd really appreciate it if you'd like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, stay tuned for next week as I go over the strategies for each of these tracks. We're pretty much at the halfway point in this series, and we aren't slowing down anytime soon. At the end of the day, all I hope for is that these videos are helping you guys out. But until next time, thank you so much for watching. Have yourselves a fantastic day, and keep on giving her, bud.